our bodies weren't designed for that, right? I mean, historically, there would be a threat. There would be a mountain lion at your door. You either attacked it, ran away, or died. And then it was over, and then you got back to living, and now our nervous system is under constant perceived threat.
What is up, guys? My name is Jim Sabellico, and welcome back to the No Half Cakes podcast, where we're going to give you the real raw ingredients you need to live a wholly successful life, and a life that you're not going to have to come home to any half cakes. And this show today is one of our full-length formats. Let me just break this down for you real quick if this is your first time here. Mondays, I give you Mindset Monday, which is a positive perspective to carry through the week. Saturdays, I give you something called a strategy sprinkle every Saturday. That's going to give you a practical, tactical tip to help you level up in both your personal and professional life. And Wednesdays, like today, is a full-length format where I'm going to sit down or stand up, either one, with a friend of mine who's done some life. And we're going to have some real raw conversation about that life. We're going to talk about the highs, the lows, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And today, I have the honor of bringing back. This is the first second time guest, right? Repeat guest that we have here, who's also the very first guest I've ever had. So Samuel Johnson, man, I am honored to have you as my first repeat guest, and also my first guest. So you are in a realm of your own, sir. Yeah. And you are a fan favorite, and here you are again. So thank you for joining me. If you have not met Samuel yet, I would highly encourage you to go back and listen to that episode. It was a great one, and I have no doubt today will be great as well. So, Samuel, Thank you for joining me, man.
You're welcome. Thank you, Jim. That was quite an illustrious introduction, and so we'll see if I can live up to that. And I am standing, by the way. I stand a lot,
good.
So standing is
Yes.
good.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Always keeping me on my toes. All right, so I would ask you to give us a brief introduction about yourself, but I know you've already done that and kind of your background. Yeah. So today I kind of want to take a bit of a different spin, and really just talk about something that you and I were talking about offline. Mm-hmm. And it's a bit of the fight or flight mechanism, because I think a lot of people operate in that space on a day-to-day. And when you and I were talking about it, realized a lot of people tend to go through that the curve, right? The curve that you so kindly showed me.
We'll talk about it.
We'll talk about it. And I wanted to have that conversation here because I think there's a lot to learn from it, and a lot to dissect, and I really just want to glean from your wisdom, sir. So let's, if you would, give me a brief introduction into what it even is, and then how it might show up in someone's real life day to day.
So thank you for that. So many people have heard about fight, flight, and the freeze response, and people will add in there now also one that's called fawning, which is basically to like faint or to acquiesce, to curry favor to someone or something. So fawning is sort of in there too, but we probably won't talk a whole bunch about fawning, but just know that's a response too in this cycle. And we're going to discuss today some nerdy things called polyvagal theory. This connects to brain science, some things I'm pretty passionate about, and a lot of credit is given to a man named Stephen Porges. So Porges, if you want to dive further into this concept. But the idea is that there is a nerve that is a central nervous system, a part of your central nervous system that starts in your brain and actually goes all the way down to roughly your thigh / knee. And this system of nerves, so it's not just one nerve, but this system of nerves is our alert system, our awareness system. So it's basically sending our brain messages around, am I safe? And after, am I safe? Can I connect? Having an awareness of A, safety, and B, can I connect, go together. Humans are relational creatures, as much as some men, not all men, but some men want to think that we're islands, and some women want to think that too. But we are pack creatures. Mammals are uh, interested in connecting and working together. And the lone wolf is actually not true. Wolves work in packs as well. So it's not a good idea to be a lone wolf. You are probably going to die if you're a wolf and you're alone. Did you want to
So
say
let me
something?
ask you
Yeah.
this, because so much as I love the technical explanation of what fight or flight is and the nerve and that
Hmm.
part, I think a lot of people aren't necessarily interested in learning all that so much as they might just need their eyes open to the fact that, hey, maybe I am stuck in a freeze state and I
Uh-huh.
never even knew this was a thing.
Yeah.
Because I've seen it a lot where people kind of get stuck in that state and it just becomes their norm. And, you know, it's difficult to explain to someone for
Yeah.
me, but again, you're the professional here. So for me, it's difficult to explain to someone, hey, this is where you are and this is where you need to go to. Um, I tend to think it's something that someone needs to realize for themselves. But I'm hoping you could kind of explain to me a little bit about what the freeze state is
Sure.
and what it might look like for someone to be stuck in that.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that question. And I do get a little nerdy about this stuff because I really do like it. So when you said that, the first thing I thought was like, why wouldn't everybody want to nerd out on this? So like, but I appreciate that perspective. So there are actually three stages, and we're going to talk bottom, middle, and top. And in that perspective, think about bottom being an ideal, middle being somewhere in between, so like warmish, and then the top is like either too hot or too cold. It really doesn't matter how you see that. But we would ideally like to be in the bottom in a healthy state. Um, we called this social engagement, and it's where mammals want to be. So that's what we talked about that already. So the first step up into the warm category would be fight or flight. And I will get to freeze, but we will talk about what that is. But everybody is going to go. So if you're in a healthy state, if you're in the bottom, in order to get to a frozen state, you would have to go through fight or flight. And fight or flight is something that we have control over. This is an important concept when we get to what freeze is and how it's not fighting or flighting. We can, when we have capacity, when our nervous system says there is a threat, do something, right? So it's reading for us all of these possible threats. There is a threat, do something. And as humans, our choices are fight or run away. And neither of those are good or bad. So sometimes we'll put this like value on, oh, I'm a fighter, so that's better than fleeing. And people will often say, like, what would you do in a high tense scenario? Would you attack that person, or would you run away? And then we like possibly shame ourselves for running. These are things that in that moment you actually don't really have a lot of control over in your system. You're going to probably pick one or the other. Now that might be a little confusing because I said you do have control. You do. It's something that your body can actually do. You can fight or you can flee, but your nervous system is going to gravitate towards one or the other of those options. Does that make sense?
It does. And I want to add a little point of clarity here because feel like when you describe this, like the first thing I think of is how does it make sense in my life? Um, I don't think a lot of people understand where this applies. And I think the easiest example is there is a mountain lion that suddenly appears on your front steps and is going to attack you.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Right.
Right. That seems like the typical fight or flight response scenario that someone might think of, and they don't necessarily think,
Right.
how does this actually show up in my everyday life?
Right. So the mountain lion of today is your boss is coming to your office door. And I know a lot of people now work online and at home, or you get an email from your boss. Okay. So that's the mountain lion. How are you going to respond? Are you going to jet off an email to all of your colleagues and say, "What do you think I did? What was wrong? He's a jerk," which would be fighting, or would fleeing be, "I'm taking the rest of the day off. I'm sick." Okay, so we all do this. Or let's think like another one might be a perceived threat. So you're walking in the city. I'm not from the city. I'm a real country rural bumpkin. Okay, so if I go into a city, I might be scanning for threats, or it might be the opposite. I might be unaware of threats. But let's just go with scanning for threats. And I see this guy lurking in the corner. Um, how am I going to respond to that? Am I going to stand my ground, or am I going to say, I'm going to walk down this other avenue, this other alley, because that would be safer? So it does show up in our lives, and I appreciate you asking that question, Jim, because what tends to happen is the majority of people live all of their lives in fight or flight. They perceive everything as a potential threat because we actually don't have mountain lions chasing us anymore. So everything, quote unquote, becomes a potential threat. And I'm making a slight joke here, but your mother in law now becomes a threat. Your father-in-law now becomes a threat. Your kid crying now becomes a threat. And threat might be the wrong word choice here, but just something that activates your nervous system in a way that you need to respond. And we have chosen, maybe that's the wrong word. Maybe that's too strong. We have allowed ourselves to live in a world that is telling us we should always be prepared for a threat. Okay, so the the easiest way of looking at this is from the media's perspective. If it bleeds, it leads, right? So you're being told constantly, you're being bombarded with messages that you should be prepared. You should always be prepared. And the problem with that is you get nervous system burnout. So if you're constantly in this middle stage, we talked about these three. If you're constantly in that middle stage, that that's where burnout happens because your system never gets a chance to relax.
And do you think that comes from maybe like doom scrolling on Facebook, where you're constantly getting
Sure.
drama of some kind, where it's this problem versus that problem, or all this stuff that's coming in
Yeah.
as input?
It's part of it, and maybe it's exacerbated for many, but it was always a thing in modern living, right? So let's go back. I'm gonna make a guess here. I might be wrong, and I'm history was not my world's best subject, but let's go back 150, 200 years, and people were terrified in England because of Jack the Ripper, right? So from the beginning of news stories, and we can go back before that with uh, myths and the terror of the vampire or whatever that's lurking out there. So there's always been a potential threat, but yes, yeah, Jim, it's been exacerbated by increased modern living.
And then all that daily consumption of these different
Right,
threats
right.
really keeps us stuck in that fight or flight
Fight or flight.
zone.
And our bodies weren't designed for that, right? I mean, historically, there would be a threat. There would be a mountain lion at your door. You either attacked it, ran away, or died. and then it was over, and then you got back to living, and now our nervous system is under constant perceived threat.
And that actually brings up something else I was literally just going through. I don't think enough people maybe put enough emphasis on this or really monitor it as closely as they should, but something as simple as notifications on your phone.
Yes.
Because I go through and regularly limit what is allowed to show up as a notification on my phone. And the concept that was explained to me, and I never really put the dots together until right now, is it's as if it's a perceived threat that's calling your attention to something important. Right. When it could be, very non-important. It could be something stupid. But all day long, you've got your phone next to you, and it's calling your attention to this or that, and it constantly draws you and spikes that response. Is that accurate?
Oh, for sure, right? So people talk about it as like the dopamine drip. A lot of people have heard this. Like, so every time your phone dings, you get a little hit of a neurotransmitter that can be perceived as I'm important, I'm interesting, but I really appreciate how you put that, Jim, because I'm in the same category. My nervous system is oriented a little bit more towards fleeing. So when I get notifications, my instant response is, what did I do now? Like, it just happens, right? And yeah, I handed my phone to 14-year-olds and say, please turn all of these things off. Just find a 14-year-old out there if you don't know how to do it. So they do.
Yeah, it's a good point though. I mean, I'll literally go through and I keep a pretty tight leash on what is allowed to interrupt my day. Like, because you download an app and all of a sudden it's sending you notifications for sales and for discounts and for news alerts and whatever else. Yeah. And next thing you know, you've gotten 300 of them per day. Not only is it sucking up your time, but it's causing you to just live in that fight or flight response zone, and that is not healthy at all.
And your brain is being flooded with a neurotransmitter that should be vacated, should be eliminated, or if you want to use, I actually love this phrase. I got it from Dr. Amen. He's a brain scientist. He said, your brain needs to be washed every night. You should be brainwashed. So that's what sleeping is. So that's a whole nother topic. But the value of good quality sleep is so that your neurotransmitters can flush out, and because they're dinging all the time in your head all day. So.
Which I guess is a great point, and I never really thought about it like that, where you shower every day, sometimes twice a day. Yeah. It's not very common for people to wash the insides of their bodies as often.
Yeah. And that's one of the values of sleep, is to have your brain washed.
Yeah. And it definitely makes me think about the consumption of crap that happens before you go to sleep, right? What type of soap you're putting in your brain before you close your eyes and immediately when you wake up. Yeah. I think a lot of people, you're scrolling your phone or you're just consuming garbage, and you wake up and you are again back to checking out what you missed while you were asleep.
Exactly. So your brain actually never really washed then, right? Because you're just picking up where you left off from the night before.
Yeah.
And it's around this idea of perceived threat. So you might not naturally think in your head, oh, I'm just checking my email or the updates from Instagram, but you're actually your brain is partially scanning for threat. It just does it naturally. So
yeah, and looking to see if there was something vitally important to your life that you may have happened to miss.
Yeah, and what is happening in the Ukraine or in Israel, or the crisis of the day,
Right.
So, yeah.
Interesting little, I don't know if you want to call it a hack, but I'll call it for this example, that I've noticed for myself, which has been beneficial, is you've got this instant response when you wake up to feel like you've got to catch up on the day and get a jump start on it. And I've always noticed it's so much more beneficial to start the day phone free, distraction free, go through your morning routine, whatever that looks like. Mm-hmm. And the little mental hack or perspective that I put on is, imagine you slept for an extra 20 minutes. whether you wake up without an alarm clock or with an alarm clock, but just imagine for a second that instead of setting your alarm clock for 7 o'clock, you set it for 7:30.
Right.
Allow yourself that half an hour. Pretend that you were sleeping, because if you happen to wake up at 7:30, the world would not have ended. You just would have woke up at 7:30. So if you wake up at 7 and then you don't tell yourself your phone exists for half an hour, just pretend you
Pretended.
hit the snooze button and you were asleep. Don't even allow yourself to look at it. Give yourself that first half an hour, 45 minutes, whatever time that you can allow. The more the better. Just start your day, go through your processes of gratitude, go through your health processes, go through whatever it is, then pick it up and start responding to it when you're ready, not letting it dictate to you
Yeah.
how that works.
And if I may add, and I agree, if I may add, though, if you're listening to this and watching this, um, I respect how difficult that is to get out of. It is a drug. Do not kid yourself. The pocket mechanism that we call phones, which quite frankly aren't used as phones, just so let's be honest, um, is a drug. You are addicted to it unless you're not, but you would actually know that you're not. So if you think you're not, you are addicted to it. So it's been compared, and again, this comes largely from Dr. Amen studies, but other people have discussed it too. It is as addictive as heroin and cocaine. There's no uh, the places, the centers of your brain that light up are the same places in your brain that light up when you're on cocaine or heroin.
That's
Yeah.
it's a scary thought.
Yeah,
So how
and
does
we're
that
handing it to 3-year-olds, by the way, too. So let's think about that. So,
very true. Um, how does that relate back to being stuck in freeze?
yeah, yeah. Thank you. So, and I was getting there. So, but thanks for that. So here we
Yeah.
are in fight flight, right? So we're in this yellow middle zone. Okay. If you want to think about it, green, yellow. Now we're going to red. Okay. Red is frozen or freeze, and we don't have control. Okay. So in yellow, our bodies say there's something I can do about this. I can fight or I can run away. And at some point, our nervous system decides there's nothing else I can do anymore. Right? And that is the layman's definition of freeze. Okay. Other people might hear the term dissociation, which, by the way, no one needs to be afraid of that word. We all dissociate at times. There's nothing wrong with it. Going into freeze from time to time, it's called daydreaming. There's nothing wrong with it. There are times when we're driving and you go, how did I get here? Right? Because our brains can sort of turn off um, in terms of cognitively processing, and it knows what to do. Your brain knows how to drive home, but you don't remember doing it per se. So all of those things are are normal. We don't have to freak out about the process of freezing from time to time. The trouble is when people, as you said at the beginning of this podcast, don't know that it's happening. Okay, so at the very, very extreme end of that are people that dissociate to such a point that potentially they might be in a different personality. That's such an extreme case. I mean, that's not happening with most of us, but we can dissociate to the point that we're completely distracted. And many of us have had this experience. I know that I have. Okay, so um, doom scrolling and or being on the internet and you're looking at this, and people call it the YouTube tunnel or hole, right? The rabbit hole. And then 8 hours later, you're like, what the did I just do? um, that's freezing, right? And so freezing doesn't have to mean that, although it can be that. It can be like literally stuck, but we can freeze and still perform tons of activities. Freezing just means that our brain has gone elsewhere. Okay. Um, in this classic definition, it means I no longer have any more capacity to do something. I can't fight. I can't fight, I can't flee, so now I'm frozen. Okay. Now, with that being said, you might have heard me say like you can still do something. Well, our bodies adapt, right? So we've learned this tool called freezing, and our brain can be over here while we're still doing this thing over here. Okay, so a classic example of that would be, think about the soldier or the person in the operating room, and they can see themselves while they're being operated on. That is a very, very beneficial experience that humans have, because you wouldn't have any more capacity, right? Like everything in your body at that point, if you're going into a military field hospital, you're probably not getting a whole lot um, painkillers. And your body is saying, we're going to separate right now because this is more than you can handle. The problem, again, Jim, comes back to the same thing, is our modern living has said everything is a risk, everything is a threat, and potentially people, and don't hear this word negatively, okay? So I want to be very clear. Potentially people who are more sensitive, and that doesn't mean, oh, you poor little sensitive thing. I'm using the word meaning you're more attuned to stimulus. That's all that word means. There are people that are more attuned to stimulus. If you are more sensitive, you would be more likely to freeze.
And so, if I understand this correct, let me just repeat it back as I'm kind of understanding it. If there's someone who maybe constantly lives in this alert state where they're getting so much stimulus coming in that's taking them so far out of normal and bringing them into fight or flight, they're staying in fight or flight because they're constantly being flooded by alerts and
Yes.
incoming notifications and just stimulus, that they sort of get overloaded and their brain just disconnects. So they can still function and go
Yes.
through a normal day as if they're just a normal everyday life person. But in response, like the natural protection mechanism for them to just get so many stimulus coming in is the disconnect of that stimulus to allow them to just continue to operate.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
And 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 as we're looking at this, because a place I think we both want to get to is, okay, so what does that look like in relationships, right? So you can be in relationship with a person who is frozen, but they can still function, and you're trying to tell them, what's wrong with you? Snap out of it. Like, come back to me. And none of that communication is received. Be-
Because to them, once they get past so much of that fight or flight and they're stuck in and now in
yes,
frozen,
they're
because they've
offline.
disconnected, that essentially feels normal. They think
Correct.
there's nothing wrong because they've disconnected out of just self preservation.
Right. And they're going about their day, but largely unaware in that moment of what you're discussing. So it is unhelpful. I was going to use a different word. That would also have been unhelpful. It is unhelpful in that space to have some sort of high level conversation with um, a spouse or a business partner, etc., because nothing is going to go in. I have a great example. Would you like it? It's personal.
Sure.
It's my personal example. Years ago, shout out to my a financial advisor. um, uh, we had a conversation, and I'm not a money person, and numbers sort of go over my head, and I was frozen the entire conversation. I was just nodding to him, and he could tell something was weird, but he didn't know what was weird. And the year after, and like each year after we meet, he's like, "You're more with me. You're more with me this year." Like, and we've made a joke out of it, but I knew exactly what was happening. I was frozen. That there was too much information and impact of that information. So For you, and I'm not saying you per se, but I'm saying for your audience, for you, you might go like, well, that's weird. Like finances don't bother me. But what if I started talking about death and planning for death? And that might shut someone else down because I recently had a discussion with someone about that, planning and preparing for the future demise of people who are aging. And those sorts of conversations don't bother me in the least. I work as a trauma therapist. I won't get into it, but I can have pretty intense, pretty deep conversations about emotions and very, very difficult, painful things that would probably shut a good amount of people down. And I've done this. I've went blah blah blah, and then I'm like, oh, I that was more than I should have said to that person because they're in emotional shutdown. And it's different for everybody, right? I mean, tons of people would go like, I can have a talk about money. Like, I mean, that doesn't, well, it shuts me down because my capacity isn't around money.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think understanding what your thing is, right, does take some work.
Yeah,
And it's important to understand that none of them are wrong, right? Just because your thing
yeah,
might be money, that person's thing might be talking about death, doesn't make either one wrong.
right.
But understanding what they are, I think it's a really good first step.
Yeah.
I just, I don't know how someone, that's what I'm trying to figure out is if someone is stuck in freeze and to them it feels normal,
Hmm.
right? Because they've gone so far into fight or flight that they've disconnected and now they're stuck in freeze. To them, in their brain, they're thinking that they've already gone back through fight or flight, now back in that normal lowest zone, right? So, what is the, how do you handle
How
that,
do you
and
help?
how do you help, and how does someone process that on their own?
Yeah. First, I'm going to say they're probably going to need a good amount of help to process it on their own. It can be done, but you're going to need help at first. So this might not be what you wanted to hear, but you probably can't process that on your own at first. Remember, we are highly connective creatures as mammals, so you do need a system. Relationships are key. Um, I'm going to read a quote. It's next to me here. Being able to feel safe with other people is probably the single most important aspect of mental health. Safe connections are fundamental to meaningful and satisfying lives. So it's about creating safety, and there are ways to do that. So I'm going to talk about that now. So your question is, how do I help, right? So this is one. I'm going to model them. I'm going to slow down my speech. I'm going to take more breaks, and I'm also going to talk more softly. So naturally, what we would want to do is speed up our speech and talk, and it start the decibel or the range starts getting higher. Lower decibel, and you and I talked about this. You just have a natural calm cadence, and your tonality is also calm. And some of those things are just natural. I don't think I have as a natural tone that people respond to as calm, but you can slow your rate down and also soften it and quiet it some. All of those are helpful to bring people out of frozen. Another thing that is helpful is letting people know that you're with them. Okay, so I'll model this real quickly and I'll do it with you. Right, um, Jim, I'm right here. It's okay. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to stay with you the whole time. I love you. I care about you. I respect you. You matter to me. And, of course, this right in this moment feels a little bit forced or contrived. But, if you're with a partner and a loved one, it hopefully won't feel quite as staged, as that.
Right.
But those things are really important. And then another thing that it can be helpful to get people out of freeze is invite them back into their body. And there are a lot of ways to do that, but they're all through the five senses. So you could ask them to move. hey, why don't we just stand up and take a breather right now, and let's just stretch. Okay, so take a deep breath, or you could ask them to talk. Okay. Stephen Porges talked about this. Someone was really nervous about public speaking, so he just started asking them mundane questions. And the process of speaking helps us get out of frozen. Okay, because it activates higher parts of our brain. Okay, your brain is offline, so you're trying to invite it back online. And you can do a lot of that through, like I said, various sensations. So, uh, excuse me, I had a big
Bless you.
sneeze there. Two, two other things. So sense, smelling. Actually, in my office, I have old bottles of uh, essential oils. My wife likes them at home, so I always take the old bottles, and I ask people if they're in frozen to like put one under their nose and breathe. Um, Music can bring people out of frozen. So any of the senses. Take a walk. Let's go for a walk. Why don't we get out of this office for a minute and take a breather. Um, all of those things. I'm trying to think if I missed any of the set. You could eat something. Yeah, you could eat something too. Like, and you would want to like savor it slowly. So like, or mint. Because a mint you're also going to get some smelling too. But these are things that require, in a sense, very little effort. But that's what we want, right? So what people often will do naturally is bombard people with cognition and thinking and deep deep ideas. People's brains can't handle that in frozen. um, it's not helpful.
What I'm hearing you say, interestingly enough, is slowing down and living life. Like, as you're talking through the things that someone might do to help go out of the frozen state, going for a walk, enjoying a meal,
Hmm.
listening to some music, like smelling the smells, stopping to smell the roses,
Yes.
as cliche as it sounds, but slowing down, removing all this external crap from coming in, and just being able to kind of enjoy your life for a second will
Yeah.
help you reset and kind of have the capacity to, really be a functioning adult again.
Yeah.
And, I think as you explain this, there's a lot of pressure. Pressure may be the wrong word, but I'm gonna use it for this scenario anyway. For someone who's done some work on themselves and continues to grow, when you look around at other people in your life, whether they are your employees, your boss, your spouse, your kids, your parents, whoever it might be, if they are in this spot where you suddenly recognize, hey, I'm recognizing this person is a shell of their former selves,
Hmm.
right? You can tell that they're not really enjoying life, that they're stuck in this
Uh-huh.
just, going through the motions phase. And that sucks to see for someone that you love. You want to like pick them up by the arms and shake them and be like, yo, wake up. What are you doing? And obviously that's the least possible helpful thing you can do.
Not helpful. But people do it all the time, right? Do it,
Yeah.
and with words as well. We shake people up with words too.
Yeah. And I feel like it's really making it worse more so than better. But I think, and that's part of the reason why I want to have this conversation is people
Yeah.
don't necessarily know, what do you do? How do you help?
Yeah. And it's
And
hard, Jim. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was going to say, I kind of think that the better that you are individually about, uh, you know, living life and being grateful and enjoying your life and stopping to actually smell the roses and do the small things, inviting people in your life. Hey, you want to go for a walk? Hey, you want to just go experience a thing?
Yeah.
Right. It allows them to kind of make that connection without having to force them into that. It doesn't have to be underhanded, I don't think, but
Right.
I think you can model that behavior.
Well, what we're talking about here is also modeling connection, right? Because again, we're connected creatures, so it can be helpful just to be present with someone else in this state and maybe just breathe with them. Um, in addition, it's helpful to, and you're speaking of it, it's helpful to become aware of your own state because very typically, if someone is in frozen, we are probably in fight or flight, or maybe we've matched them, but let's just say we're in fight or flight and are aware that they're in frozen. So, what do people in fight or flight do? And we're just going to go for the moment with fight, okay? So, then we're going to fight with that person. We're going to say, hey, snap out of it. Hey, come back here, right? You aren't tracking me. So you're fighting and they're frozen, right? So having an awareness of where your nervous system is also key and helpful for their nervous system. Because we need to also help regulate our system. So if I'm in fight or flight, how can I get myself down to it's called ventral vagal, but that's super nerdy. So just a calm place to be. Okay. So how do we bring ourselves into calm? There is one point I want to make around this. So most people oscillate, by the way, that are struggling. We talked about that at the beginning of this conversation. So if you're struggling, you're going from fight or flight up into I have no more capacity, I'm frozen. And then you go back down to fight or flight. And guess what? You pop right back up into frozen. And then you go back down to fight or flight. And it's this oscillation between yellow and red, yellow and red, yellow and red, or warm to too hot, warm to too hot. And the problem is that's incredibly effective. Right? The problem is this oscillation is incredibly effective, and that's where people live. Hear this out. It's terrifying for most people to think about fighting or fleeing, and yet we do need to do that. Our nervous system needs to be able to have the experience of fighting or fleeing and bringing that to resolution. If you don't, you'll just pop right back up into frozen. And this works for tons of people in the world. People have been told, stop fighting. Or people have been told, stop running away. Don't be a coward. Okay. Well, then they're going to pop into frozen, right? Okay. And what we need to help people do is have this awareness that it's gonna suck. It is really, really, really gonna suck as you come out of frozen. It's going to be awful. And I'm not a very popular therapist when I tell people this, but it's true. If you want to get out of frozen, you are going to have to go through fight or flight and live it and feel it and not escape into your mind because you'll
Yeah,
just
and
go
I
that
think
right back to frozen.
on the plus side of that is once you go through that process on the way back down, you learn so much more about yourself
Yeah.
and the process in and of itself that you sort of build up the information and the education so that next time this comes up, you don't go back to stuck and frozen. I think we've talked about
If you
before
do the
that.
reps, if you do tons and tons of reps, because I don't want people to hear like, oh, okay, so I have to do it once. No,
Right.
over and over and over until your nervous system learns that, yeah, I can go through fight or flight and I'm going to be okay.
Yeah. And it's normal, let's say this too, to go through this range of zones. Like even the person who's done the most work and the most healed has continued to go through this,
Yeah.
change of zones on a daily basis or a weekly basis or whatever that might look like. But it's not a thing, it's a thing that you just pass through, not get stuck in.
Yeah. And you're gonna and everybody freezes. Like it's not something you get out of. Your nervous system says, okay, we've reached capacity offline. Um, that's fine. Like it's not something to be ashamed of.
Yeah.
Of course that
But it's
happens.
important to be aware of it, right? And understand how we're, first of all, understand that this is an actual thing, right? It's not just some like, kooky theory that two dudes are talking about on a Wednesday morning, but like it's an actual thing that they can
Yeah.
go and study and learn. And it also has like physical, it exhibits physical changes in behavior and like changes the way that you feel. That's also correct, right?
It changes the way that you feel. Yes, yeah, and longer term, right? So I'll just throw this piece in that if someone has had a challenging childhood, i.e., trauma, or didn't connect well, they're going to be more likely to struggle with fight, flight, and freeze because they didn't have the safe emotional connections as a child. And it doesn't mean you had to have done this with a parent. That's not true. You could have done it with an uncle or a teacher. So there's lots of places that humans connect with. But yeah, the greater the trauma, the greater the disconnection, the more likely it is that you're going to struggle with fight or flight. And that's not a doomsday. Those are things I've struggled with. And it's one of the reasons I talk about this so much, that, yeah, you absolutely can learn to go back into social engagement. And it's one of the reasons people say, yeah, I can hear you breathing, because it's one of the things I do a lot. I slow my breathing down intentionally.
Yeah. This there's a chart that you've shared with me, which I'm going to
Hmm.
put up on the screen because I think it's critically important for people
Yeah,
to
I'm
like
looking at it right now.
look at this and understand. And on the right side of that chart, um, it shows you kind of what it increases and decreases as you go through it. And when you look at being in freeze or being in fight or flight, where it can increase your fuel storage and insulin activity, right? It can help you gain weight and make it hard for you to lose weight.
Yeah,
Um, it can decrease your temperature, your muscle tone, your eye contact, your depth of breath, your social behavior, your immune response. Like these are things that when we feel like, why is it difficult for me to lose weight? Why am I always sick?
hmm,
Why do I feel this way?
yeah,
Why am I having issues with my heart rate? Like there are actual nervous system uh, related things.
absolutely.
It's not just let's take some medication and try and fix the problem. Sometimes we have to look at what are the other stimulus that are coming in, right? And what else can we do? And may it seem dumb, but turning off the notifications on your phone and going for a walk and listening to some music may very well help you
Absolutely.
feel like
Lose
a normal
weight.
human again.
It could
Right.
help you lose weight, and it could help your immune system. There's absolutely no doubt that those things, and they are easy, and that's why people don't do them, because we think things are supposed to be hard. Um,
Right.
so just, honestly, you just Google the words polyvagal and chart, and you'll find this chart that we're talking about.
Yeah. It's, when we first had this conversation and I looked at it, I'm like, man, that explains so much. It explains a lot for me, for, people in my life I look at and I'm like, oh, this person exhibits this behavior and they also have this, this, and this.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Hmm. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
And the immediate response is I want to be like, print out the chart and hand it to him and be like, yo, fix your crap. But obviously
Somebody's
that's
in
not going to
fight or
help.
flight, Jim.
Um, but but I think the better response that I've learned, from having these conversations is to continue to learn that myself
Mhm.
and to walk it out and to model that
Yep.
behavior,
Yep.
and just give them that safe space where they feel like they could do the research and they can de-escalate themselves,
Yeah.
right? To allow them to feel loved, seen, heard, and appreciated, and where they can come to that conclusion on their own, not by force.
Right.
That I think if one thing I've learned, if nothing else, is that forcing people to try and change is one of the least effective things you can ever do.
This is a learning you're talking about. This is a learning that you live, and people often come to me and say, like, just give me the 5 steps, and I'm like, I'm really sorry, but you're in the wrong therapy office for that. There are therapists who will teach you those things, but that's not how I work. There's experiential learning, and that's mostly what I do, and that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, and society has gotten to a point where I think everyone wants to pay the $4.99 to buy the
Right.
course to learn from the guru, and you give
Yeah.
them the three magic pills, and they go on their way. And unfortunately, this is not. Well, I shouldn't say it's not that straightforward because it actually is really straightforward. But there is no magic pill, right? You
Yeah,
have
but
to learn and
you
go
have
through
to
it.
do it both. You have to do both. You have to, in a sense, learn it, and you can learn this chart in 2 seconds. It's not complicated at all. But you then have to live it, and that's the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's been a lot. I sincerely appreciate this conversation. That was a hard word to say. I appreciate you and this conversation. And I have a feeling this will not be the last, because there's so much to learn here. And I think the deeper that we learn about ourselves and our brains and how our own brains operate in the world, the more control we have over our own lives, which is amazing to think about, why we don't do more of that. I know it's uncomfortable, and I know sometimes it might seem hard to grasp, but I feel like these conversations, they help me, honestly, learn more about myself and my own relationships and life in my own realm. And I do know from feedback I've gotten from the first time we've talked that other people enjoy this as well. So again, honor to you for taking the time out to share this with us. And any parting words?
Go out and experience life. Smell the roses today.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, brother.